To this day, Toy Story remains one of my favourite films of all time. Maybe it's just that I grew up at the exact right time for it to be so relatable, with the original film releasing in 1995 making me a 2-year-old sprog at the time. While I was obviously too young to properly appreciate the themes and even its surface story, I continued watching it as I got slightly older, and as I started to get a bit more mature, my love of it grew even more. I even had my own Buzz and Woody figures and a Woody costume and everything. Then in 1999, Toy Story Mania was reignited with the release of Toy Story 2. I would have been 6 years old at this point, which is much more in line with how old Andy would have been, which only served to make the series even more relatable to me. It helped, of course, that Toy Story 2 was an incredible sequel, not just rehashing the same ideas from the first film, but introducing brand new concepts and developing the characters even further, while not ignoring what they went through in the first film. By 1999, I was already a massive fan of the PS1, so you can imagine my excitement when I learnt that Toy Story 2 was getting a video game for my favourite console, and at the time, I absolutely loved it. I remember it feeling so true to the film, and being able to see all of the locations from the film, as well as some that weren't actually featured in the film itself, was just the best thing ever. But this was when I played the game 23 years ago. Looking back on the situation today, I know that the films hold up. In fact, they've only become more relatable and interesting as I've gotten older, and I've grown to appreciate the themes in them even more. It probably sounds stupid to a lot of people, but Toy Story 1 and 2 are honestly up there with some of my favourite films. However, where does this leave the Toy Story 2 video game? Well, let's pop it in and finally revisit it and see if it holds up just like the films do. As soon as I put this thing in, I was hit by a sense of nostalgia. Does anybody else remember this weirdly eerie Disney interactive opening screen? I've got no idea why they chose to give this opening such a weirdly creepy atmosphere to it. Like, why does a happy-go-lucky platformer need to have this creepy vibe as soon as you put the disc in? I have to admit though, I do kinda love it. At first I was a little bit worried that this wasn't going to be anywhere near as polished as I remembered it being. The title screen is really boring, just featuring still images of Woody and Buzz and a static background too. That's when the game pulls a complete 180 though, because the actual main menu is really good, having the options screen be on the Etch-a-Sketch toy and a cutscene viewer which is displayed from the perspective of Lenny, the binocular toy. Starting the game we get a cutscene, although it's less of a proper cutscene and more so a compressed version of a scene from the film. This was rarely common with licensed games at the time and was actually quite cool because in some cases the game was released before the VHS came out. This means that for a very short while the only way of watching the film after the cinema release was done was by playing the video game and unlocking all of the snippets. The level select menu is also really charming, with it once again being drawn onto Etch-a-Sketch, but as you unlock more levels, it slowly gets more coloured in, and each of the levels are smoothly transitioned to, which gives you a sense of where you are in relation to the other levels. This ends up making the game feel more like an interconnected world, more so than each level being completely disconnected. I also love how every level has a different soundscape as you hover over it. There's so much detail here. This is actually genuinely probably one of the best level select menus I've ever seen. But enough already with these cutscenes and menus. Let's get started with the actual game. The game actually quite accurately follows the events of the film, with us playing as Buzz on his journey with the rest of the toys to rescue Woody, who has been taken by a toy collector called Al. Most of the levels are actually taken from locations that we see in the film, with only a couple of them being more loosely based on things from the film. Like here we have a construction yard which is never actually seen in the film, but we do see things that imply the existence of a construction yard, I guess. The first level is set in Andy's house and is an awesome introduction to the game. This level is pretty huge and has loads of different rooms featuring different objectives and collectibles, and it really hits home how big everything is from the perspective of a toy. This game is a 3D collectathon platformer, but instead of jumping through the Mushroom Kingdom to rescue a princess, or racing through an island to stop an evil scientist, the levels here are based on real-world locations that we'd see every day. And I think this is an amazing concept for a game like this, because you can imagine a toy jumping around in your own house or out in your own garden. It retains that sense of imagination that the films have, and I think this is potentially one of the greatest strengths of the game. You'll find yourself stuck in a baby's crib and using your laser to undo the locks and jump out. You'll be jumping across the aisles of a shop to avoid the dangers lurking on the floor. You'll be opening fridge doors in order to make it onto countertops. It's pretty cool how there's quite a lot of interactivity in the world like this, and you feel like you really are a toy. You're trying to solve these intricate puzzles in order to do something that a regular human wouldn't even need to think about. Even when this interactivity just boils down to pushing boxes to allow you to climb up higher, it still feels great. Buzz actually has quite a few abilities at his disposal, including a ranged laser attack, a close-up spin attack, a double jump which is activated by using his wings, a sort of ground pound stomp attack, and he has quite a few context sensitive skills too, like the aforementioned box pushing, but also zip wire sliding, climbing up rope-like objects, swinging on bars, and all of this really adds to the feeling of the levels being these massive playgrounds. Something which I really appreciated is that a lot of these abilities are actually taken from the films. The laser is pretty obvious, but the stomp attack is a reference to the scene where all of the toys need to jump at the same time in order to open the doors to Al's toy barn. The bar swinging is something that Buzz actually does in the film at one point, and I just really like this. It shows that the developers of the game were paying close attention to making it feel authentic, and nothing here feels like something that Buzz wouldn't be able to do. What really surprised me about this though, outside of the range of moves available to you and the awesome concepts behind all of the different levels, was just how well this game holds up from a technical aspect. First of all, the controls here are almost perfect. Everything is mapped to the controller in a really easy to understand way by default, but in a nice little touch, you do actually have a degree of customization if you want to change this layout. Normally the downfall of a lot of games of this era is the camera, but I actually think that this game feels really good in this area. L2 and R2 will rotate the camera around Buzz, and you can even invert this in the options too. Pressing both L2 and R2 at the same time will center the camera behind you, and you even have a first-person mode if you need a better look around. This isn't just a nice little detail to take in the sights though, because this actually activates an aiming mode, which lets you way more accurately shoot flying enemies or other high-up things. I absolutely love how you can see the reflection of Buzz's face in his helmet in this mode too. That's just such a good detail, and it's another throwback to the films. On top of all of this, the game also supports analog controls, and normally with PS1 games I never use the analog sticks because a lot of games just don't feel right with them. It's more like the analog stick is replicating the D-pad, so it ends up feeling a little bit inaccurate. But here in Toy Story 2, it feels perfect, exactly how you would expect it to work in a modern game, and I ended up using it for my whole playthrough. The only caveat with this is that the right stick doesn't control the camera, but this is very forgivable considering that the camera controls are already awesome. Of course, the game also runs extremely well too, and practically never dropped any frames. This is particularly impressive considering that some of these levels are really big. What's interesting though is that despite them being big, they're also really tightly designed too, normally featuring at least 2 main objectives in a single area. Most games would have had certain areas that are basically there just to be ran through or to collect something kind of arbitrary, but there's not really any areas in this game that feel like that. There's always something to be actually doing, which makes exploring the levels feel really rewarding. Another super impressive thing about this is that most PS1 games that are on a similar scale to this would have featured a fog effect. This was done because the PS1 was thought to not have the capacity to be able to render entire open levels all at the same time. With the release of Spyro the Dragon though, we saw that with the right technical know-how, it was possible to cleverly render huge levels. And this was done by having things in the distance be rendered at drastically lower quality. But even so, this was an incredible workaround, and it makes the Spyro games hold up extremely well graphically, whereas other games look quite dated. The reason that I bring this up is because amazingly, Toy Story 2 doesn't feature a fog effect and feels much more in line with what a Spyro game looks like. You can see the entire level if you're at a good vantage point, and this not only helps with navigation, but also makes it hold up extremely well visually too. The one thing with this is that while the actual levels are fully rendered, the actual collectibles and enemies aren't. This means that you can be running forward through a level and things will suddenly be appearing in front of you. Not great when you're trying to hunt down collectibles and you straight up can't see them if they're slightly too far away. But still, this is only a minor thing really, and if you're being thorough, this shouldn't really be a big problem. The one other tiny nitpick that I have with the general movement controls is that they do feel a little bit slippery. However, the game never asks you to do any pinpoint platforming or anything like that, so this isn't too bad of an issue. In general, this game looks pretty darn incredible. Not only because of the impressive draw distance, but because every single level is completely distinct, and all of them are pretty detailed with little visual flares too. The environments all feel like real places with loads of attention to detail, like Andy's Buzz Lightyear bedding, screwdrivers and tools lying around in the garage, coffee machines on kitchen worktops, bins and soggy boxes littering the alleyways. It's a really good looking game. The character models can look a little bit off sometimes, but in terms of the environments, this definitely gets a thumbs up. All of this is incredible. The controls are great, the camera is way ahead of its time, the graphics are detailed and it's technically impressive, but all of this is meaningless if we don't have anything interesting to be actually doing. Well, once again, we're in luck, because there's actually quite a lot of objectives given to us in this game. The overarching mission here is to collect Pizza Planet tokens, which are essential to unlock the next levels. Although, I never actually had a low enough amount of tokens to see a locked level, but that's just because I'm amazing, obviously. There's 5 of these tokens in each level. One is simply hidden somewhere and sometimes requires a unique puzzle to be solved to unlock it, like here where you need to change lights to make the bottom and top rows match, here where you need to blow this inflatable duck up and then stomp on it to get boosted up to a token, or here where you need to combine these base colours to make a certain combined colour. Stupidly, I actually struggled with this a little bit, but I'm blaming that on me being slightly colourblind, okay? I'm not just an idiot. The other 4 objectives are fundamentally always the same, but normally have a different spin on them depending on the level. So for example, there's always a timed challenge, but sometimes it'll be a race against RC. Sometimes you'll be told to collect a set of 5 items as quick as you can, with both the person giving you this objective and the actual item you're collecting changing depending on the level. And then there was this really cool unique objective where you needed to make your way down this winding path without jumping or touching the sides, while also on a timer. I loved this bit and it was actually quite tense. So even though this objective is just thrown into the category of a timed mission, what you're actually doing can be wildly different. So there's actually quite a lot of variety with this. The third objective is to beat a mini-boss, and once again, this is also quite varied, with all of the bosses being completely original designs, and sometimes having a certain weakness which you need to work out. For example, the robot in the attic of Andy's house can only be hit from behind when he needs to wind himself up again after chasing you. There's a Zerg kite boss which you need to hit while it's in the air, but after each hit it'll chase you for a while. There's this prospector boss who can only be hit with spin attacks because lasers will just bounce off of him. And then, admittedly, there are quite a few of these which just boil down to you shooting them with your laser, which is boring, but considering that this is just one of 5 objectives in each level, I don't really mind this too much. The 4th objective is to find 50 coins scattered through the level and bring them back to Ham. These coins are literally everywhere, just sprinkled in the levels themselves to guide you along, and also they're dropped by enemies when you defeat them. One of my biggest criticisms with the game is actually that the enemies will constantly come back if you leave the area, and I really don't like this. It makes it difficult to tell where you have and haven't explored, and it doesn't really add anything to the experience because you've already proved that you can beat them by destroying them for the first time. Another thing attached to the coin system is that there's no reason, as far as I can tell, to collect any more than 50 coins in any level. Ham will only ever need 50 in order to give you a token, and there's no store or anything to buy cosmetics or extras. This is probably a pretty big missed opportunity because they probably could have come up with quite a lot of skins for Buzz. Like maybe one where he's wearing Woody's hat, a Mrs. Nesbit one where he's wearing his utility belt, and loads of other stuff. They could have even have gotten more creative and done a Zerg colour variant of Buzz and stuff like that. Alternatively, this theoretical store could have just have let you buy lives, health, or certain other power-ups. But yeah, unfortunately a store like this doesn't exist, so it ends up making the coins feel a little bit pointless after you've gotten 50 of them. The 5th and final objective is to find 5 of a certain collectible that are hidden throughout the whole level and bring them back to a certain character. So this could be finding 5 chicks and bringing them back to the mother hen, 5 aliens back to its mothership, 5 of these weird little rabbit things back to Jessie, and other things like that. Fundamentally, this is the same in every level, but just with different skins on the thing that you're collecting. But this ends up being one of the better objectives because this incentivizes you to actually thoroughly explore, which, because of the awesome level design, is the most fun thing to do in the game. What is a little bit weird is that there's no way of actually seeing a list of objectives and which ones you've already completed when you're in the level itself. This means that in theory you could accidentally leave the level before finishing all 5 of the objectives, so what you need to do is sort of remember how many that you've already done in order to keep track of it. Because there are only 5 objectives per level though, luckily this isn't too difficult to keep track of. Still, that is a bit of a weird oversight. We've already said that the game looks quite amazing, and that makes exploring the levels great in its own right. But add to that some pretty awesome actual level design, and that's how a game gets elevated to become something really special. There's always something in each level that makes it really memorable. So for example, the construction site has this huge vertical climbing section which takes a while to actually get to the top of, and then when you finally do get to the top, there's a boss battle against a pretty scary jackhammer boss. This guy constantly follows you around and is invincible against standard attacks too. Then we have this elevator level which has this huge section where you press a switch to activate the actual elevator, and then you need to jump on and off of platforms to make your way to the top. This level where you're outside of an airport is really open and has you jumping onto the wings of a plane which is constantly moving in a circle, and then when you're on the plane's wing you're actually high up enough to jump onto the surrounding buildings. Then there's the Owl's Spaceland level, which is a little bit more maze-like with its design, but it has this awesome bit where you're going down an aisle of the store, and there's this war raging between all of the Buzzers and the Zergs, with lasers shooting across from both sides. There's the Owl's Penthouse level, which has multiple really good sections, like this bit where you need to turn on all of the water sources in the bathroom in order to flood it and gradually make your way up higher by floating on sponges. And then in the same level there's this puzzle where you need to change the tracks that a train is driving on in order to get it to drive into a dead end and allow you to move a box. Honestly, every single level of this game is really good and has something new to offer. Even games made by really popular developers normally have at least one bad or kinda middle of the road level, but Toy Story 2 never really has a low point. Sometimes levels will have a 6th objective, but instead of rewarding you with a token, it will instead unlock a new temporary ability. This is always given to you by Mr. Potato Head for finding one of his missing pieces, and once the ability is unlocked in that level, it's unlocked in every level that features it. The abilities themselves are pretty good, but they do sometimes feel maybe a little bit underutilized. Like the shield ability, which lets you walk across dangerous goo, which would normally hurt you, but I'm fairly sure that this is only actually necessary to use a single time in the whole game. And even then, I'm pretty sure that you could just tank this damage and not use the shield at all. Then there's the disc launcher, which is the most powerful weapon in the game and is used to beat enemies with armor. But again, I'm reasonably sure that there's only one enemy in the whole game that actually needs to be beaten with this. And of course, that's the scary jackhammer boss that I mentioned before. Then we have speed boots, which are actually quite fun, but again, they're only used a couple of times. The grappling hook is quite good and is actually used a lot in the elevator level, to be fair. And then the hover boots, which are quite fun too, but are unlocked so late into the game that once again, they're not very well utilised. I almost feel like these abilities could have been completely scrapped, or maybe just made accessible from the beginning of the game, and maybe replaced by giving you one of the base moves that Buzz has. Like maybe actually unlocking the charge attacks for the laser and the spin, the double jump, and the zip wire sliding would have been better, because not only are these more useful things to use that would have added a sense of progression to the game, but also they wouldn't have been temporary power-ups either. An added negative to these abilities is that they introduce an element of backtracking to the game. Backtracking is something which I often defend, because I think it can be a great way of showing how much better you've gotten at a game, or how much more powerful you are now. Unfortunately though, this is a bad example of backtracking, where it kinda feels like it's just there to lengthen the game artificially. The two worst levels for this are Ali's and Gullie's and Owl's Toy Barn. And the reason for this is because you're sort of led on to believe that you can get all 5 of the collectibles needed for a token. But then, after you've done everything that you can possibly do in the level without the power-ups, you're left with 1 or 2 missing. So then you need to come back later after having unlocked the abilities that you need, and not only get all of the collectibles that you previously missed, but also the ones that you already collected too. Because of course, when you enter a level a second time in order to replay it, everything resets. Luckily though, the token progression doesn't reset, so if you've already completed an objective and got the Pizza Planet token, that doesn't reset. That would be terrible. But yeah, this is probably the single worst thing about the whole game, to be honest, because there's no real reason that the levels couldn't have been completable on a first run through. Another thing this game throws at us are boss battles, because yeah, having a mini-boss in every level of the game just isn't enough. We need full-on boss levels too. These bosses are all actually reasonably good, but none of them are particularly challenging. We have this one against a Zerg spaceship, where every time you hit it, it'll release a new batch of standard enemies to come after you, while it also chases you down at the same time. There's this slime boss where you need to rapidly shoot it as it attacks you with projectiles and jumps at you, and then each time you think you've beaten it, it grows back even bigger and requires more hits to defeat. We have the final boss of the game, which is actually a combination of the previous 3 cowboy mini-bosses, which actually makes the fight feel quite climactic. Like you're used to fighting these guys one-on-one, but now it's 3-on-1. So yeah, overall I'm quite happy with these. Not only are they quite varied, but they also offer something different to the main levels to mix things up. That's actually quite important, considering that there's not really any different playstyles here. Most games like this would have had a vehicle section or a turret section or something, but Toy Story 2 was so confident with its core design that it didn't dilute itself with anything like that, which is actually really impressive. The final thing I want to mention is that the music in this game is actually pretty good. I mean, at this point, what did you expect? The rest of the game goes above and beyond with what was required of it, so of course the music is good. Something that I liked was that every single level actually has a completely original music track to go along with it, and this adds to how different the levels all feel to one another. Strangely, the first level probably has the worst music out of all of them, which doesn't set your expectations very high. But then the second level blows us away with this track, which I literally still to this day often hum to myself, despite having not played this game for years. I also love this more sort of chilled out cowboy themed track that's played during Al's penthouse. It almost sounds like some kind of epic cowboy duel is about to start, and it's fitting that this is where Buzz and the gang find Woody, Stinky Pete, Bullseye and Jessie in the film. So, to go back to the question that I asked all the way back at the start of this video, does the Toy Story 2 video game still hold up today? And the answer, kind of unexpectedly, is a resounding yes. There's just hardly anything to complain about outside of little nitpicky things, like the lack of anything to do with surplus coins, and the fact that there is a little bit of backtracking involved, although even with that, I did only need to revisit 3 of the levels, so even that's not that big of an issue. I suppose another thing is that there's no real 100% completion reward either. You end up just unlocking a bonus scene from the film, which isn't really all that rewarding. Maybe you could have unlocked Infinite Super Laser or something. That might have been pretty cool. The positives far, far outweigh any negatives here though. The camera is really good, the controls are almost perfect, there's a ton of stuff to do in every single level, and each area feels incredibly lovingly crafted and filled to the brim with obstacles and collectibles. I love how dynamic and interactable the levels are too, with these seesaw platforms which change depending on where you stood on them, switches which activate contraptions, and loads of other things. The music is memorable and catchy, Buzz's moveset is pretty varied, and the unlockable abilities are fun, even if they are a little bit underutilised. The graphics are really good, having loads of attention to detail and not having a fog effect, despite the scope and scale of the actual levels. This is a flipping great game, and in a strange way, it's almost a shame that it was related to Toy Story. What I mean by this is that if this had been an original game, it probably would have spawned sequels and become a popular series in its own right. On the other hand though, this being a Toy Story game quite clearly influenced its design to such a point where it would probably be impossible to separate it from the thing it's based on. I think that's the reason this game is so good. It's not just a throwaway licensed game where you could just put a different skin on the characters and pass it off as an Ice Age game or something. The developers here clearly loved the source material and crafted this whole thing around the idea of it being a Toy Story game. As a kid, this was the dream. To have received a game of this quality based on a film series that I loved so much and still to this day love so much is just amazing. I doubt that any of the developers of the game will ever see this video, but if they ever do, I want to say thank you. This is exactly how a licensed game should be handled, by fans of the source material, for fans of the source material. If you haven't ever played this for yourself and you're a fan of platformers, or you're a big fan of Toy Story, I urge you to give this a go. You could obviously go out and get the original version of it on the PS1, but it is also available on the PS3 digitally as a PS1 classic. Hopefully at some point in the future we'll also see this release on the PS5 as well, because I know they are adding some PS1 games to a higher tier of the PlayStation Plus subscription. I just want this game to be as accessible as possible, because not only is it great in its own right, but it also doesn't deserve to get lumped in with a load of other bad licensed games. This one's something special. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon. Also let me know down in the comments if there's any other licensed games, especially Disney or Pixar ones, that you think I should take a look at. Other than that though, all that's left to say is thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!